My project begins with a personal experience. The first time I consciously perceived a gap in my life. The 17-minute period of time lasting nowhere. It was a rainy night, and I stayed late at the studio, working on my project. I was so lost in the design, and I forgot about the time. When I finally remembered to look at my watch, I realized that it was only 5 minutes until the departure of the last bus home. I quickly packed everything, ran out of the studio. I jumped on my bike, rushing to the bus stop. While my body was flying downhill past the Buchanan building, my mind was still at the studio, thinking about the bicycle ramp in my design, meandering through the woods. Suddenly, my bike hit something, and I literally flew up in the air. I ran straight into a traffic barrier that stood in the middle of the road. The next thing I remember is that I am lying in the rain, and the two strangers were talking to me. Well, fragments of memories are flashing in my brain, fading in and out of the reality. At that particular moment, I could not recall which day it was, why I was, and what I was doing. And I could not tell apart what was actually happening from what were merely fragmented images from my memory. I was in a deep panic because although I tried recall really hard to put together the puzzle pieces to find the right sequence of the fragments, I could not. Reality and memory became so confused and tangled that I felt like a caricature in a fiction manipulated by a third-rate writer. Lying on the stretcher in the ambulance, I gradually calmed down and regained my sense of presence and asked the paramedic sitting beside me what time it was. Since this accident, I have often thought about the lost time, of which I have no memory at all, and about the counter time that followed it, which rendered me unable to tell apart present reality from past memories. They made me question reality. What is the substance of the reality I am living in? What is my identity formed through my memories? If that 17-minute period didn't exist in my memory, had it actually happened to me?
This project begins with a story I heard while traveling in Paris. My Airbnb host, Julie, invited me to join her and her friend Nicholas for dinner at home. They were both mechanical engineers from the south of France. That evening, we talked about many things over grilled cheese toast and cheap wine, French philosophy, Japanese literature, American movies, and of course, architecture. During the conversation, Nicholas told us a story he heard from his grandfather.
Have you heard about the story of Plato's cave?
You mean the one in which people born in the cave treat the shadows appearing on the wall of the cave as reality?
Yes, but there is another story in which the cave and its outside are not merely analogs. Everyone is born in the cave, and there are an infinite number of exits to the outside. Each has a different number associated with it, yet whenever someone passes through an exit, they end up in the same space with the number 17. Therefore, Socrates named this space Cave 17. It is a space that does not have an edge, and a person inside is always in the center of an infinite field. Of course, Socrates was not the only one who had ever managed to enter there, but one of the few who found the way back through the exit he had originally traversed.
So, is this space some sort of parallel world?
Yes and no. Cave 17 appears to be outside of the world we live in, and our world seems to be surrounded by this infinite space. At the same time, outside Cave 17 there is another space, which is our world. And this objectified Cave 17 in our world is said to be at the ends of the world and the great outer sea. Finding this outside is the easiest way to freely pass across our world and Cave 17. And that was virtually what Aristotle asked Alexander the Great to look for, at the ends of the world and the great outer sea, before Alexander's epic conquest of the East.
I was lost in thought over Nicholas' description, trying to imagine how the space of Cave 17 could look like. I started to think about Jorge Luis Borges' story, The Library of Babel, in which the world is essentially an infinite library with an infinite number of books. But suddenly, a question struck me. If what you said is true, why is it not written about in Plato's Republic? I asked.
The true Socrates was never written down. Do you know the story of Thoth in Plato's Phaedrus?
No, I don't.
Thoth was an Egyptian old god, credited with inventing letters. In Phaedrus, he claims that the letters would make the Egyptian wiser and give them better memory. On the contrary, Thamus, the king of Egypt, argues that the discovery of letters would create forgetfulness in the learners' souls, because they will not use their memory. Letters would thus be an aid not to memory but to reminiscence. Socrates used this story to defend dialectics against writing. Accordingly, the true Socrates was never written down but spoken. In the second letter of Plato, there is even a statement that no writing of Plato exists or will ever exist. I brought up this story because a few days ago I saw an exhibition in the Guimet Museum about the Buddhist caves in Danhuang, China. One of the main exhibition rooms focused solely on a specific cave, numbered 17. What a coincidence. You should check it out while you're here.
Following the dinner conversation, I kept thinking about the spatial labyrinth and narrative paradox Nicholas had led me into. How could Socrates know for certain if all axes from our world lead to the very same Cave 17? How could Cave 17 be both inside and outside our world? This project begins with the place I visited. The Dunhuang Caves, located near the oasis of Dunhuang on the southern route of the Silk Road, are more than 3,000 kilometers from Beijing. Nearly 800 caves carved into a cliff of relatively soft stone allow for a fabulous journey through 1,000 years of history and art from the 5th to the 15th century. I read this from the introductory text of The Treasure of the Dunhuang Thousand Buddhist Caves at the Guimet Museum. In the special exhibition, 2 of the caves were reconstructed in 1:1 scale for the very first time, including murals and statues. The original Dunhuang manuscripts from the Pao Paleo collection were also on display. On a summer day of year 1900, the Taoist monk Wang Yonglu was doing his daily cleaning in the corridor of Cave 16 when suddenly a sliver of light shined through a mirror into his eyes. Behind the mirror, he discovered a secretly walled chamber. More than 50,000 manuscripts, ranging from works on history and mathematics to folk songs and dance, fill this less than 10 square meter cave from floor to ceiling. This space is now numbered the 17th among the Dunhuang caves, and the documents discovered there are referred to as the Dunhuang manuscripts. 8 years following the monk's discovery, the French explorer Paul Pelliot went to Dunhuang. Pelliot was one of the first few Western explorers visiting at a time when most of the manuscripts were still in the cave. As an Orientalist fluently speaking 13 languages, he lived through all the texts in 3 weeks and selected more than 7,000 to take back to Paris, along with other fragments and statues. This description is from the documentary film played at the exhibition about the Paul Pelliot collection of the Dunhuang manuscripts. Following my visit to the Guillemette Museum, the story of Cave 17 and the manuscripts prompted me to further research this fascinating subject, finding out several intriguing facts. First, none of the Dunhuang manuscripts discovered in Cave 17 are complete books or documents, but instead, all of them are fragments. Moreover, the original copies of the manuscripts are presently located in libraries and museums around the world, with only about 1/5 of them remaining in China. Second, the Dunhuang manuscripts were written not only in Chinese, but also in many other languages, including Sanskrit and Hebrew. Unlike other explorers, Paul Pelliot spoke nearly all the languages in the manuscripts. Hence, his selection with many unique copies of Chinese classics and Buddhist sutra is considered the single most valuable among the many collections all over the world. Third, the manuscripts date from the 5th to the early 11th century. Prior to the discovery of Cave 17, texts preserved on paper and silk dating from before the 10th century had been rarely found. In a way, the discovery of the scripts in this less than 10 square meter cave resulted in a much clearer picture of the world across the time of more than 3 dynasties. Fourth, judging by an inscription on its west wall, Cave 17 was initially a shrine for a monk named Hongbian. At the same time, the floor of the cave is 1.2 meters above the ground level of Cave 16, which is rarely the case for connected caves. Having found out more about Cave 17, more questions and paradoxes appeared. Why was the cave sealed? Why were all the manuscripts fragments? What happened between the reopening of the cave in 1900 and the arrival of the first explorer in 1907? What was there at the moment when Vaughn opened the cave, and what transpired before its rediscovery? Once the wall separating Cave 16 and Cave 17 was broken, was the sacred cave still the same space? This project begins with a book I read called The Great Town Record on the Western Regions, written to dictation by the Chinese monk named Xuanzang in the 7th century. In an exhibition in Paris, I saw a fragment of this book, known to be the earliest copy ever found, and numbered 3814 in the Pelliot collection. In 1909, the explorer Paul Pelliot brought the fragment to Paris, along with other 7,000 manuscripts from Cave 17 in Dunhuang, China. The Great Town Record narrates Xuanzang's 17-year pilgrimage to India between 629 to 645 AD, with the purpose of obtaining original Buddhist scripts. In the text, he describes more than 100 countries seen during this trip, their geography, history, culture, religion, and folklore. Among these stories, the most fascinating one is what Xuanzang heard in Nalanda, India, before heading southwest to Sarnath, where Buddha gave his first sermon. The story takes place in a small village named Hanu in the Great Himalayas, home to the most remote Aryan tribe in Ladakh. People who live there have perfect memory. They remember everything that happens in their lives, even in their dreams. As a consequence, their notion of many things is quite unique. For instance, in their language, there is no concept of forgetting, no expression similar to "I forgot something." there's only known and unknown. Likewise, there is no concept of history, only stories. Everything that happens in stories is associated with specific storytellers and times. For example, the story of the origin of the village has 17 different versions told by the 17 founders of the village. The basic story is the same, but some parts vary depending on the founder's personal experience and perspective. In this story, the ancient villagers were remnants of Alexander the Great's army. On their way back from the east, they found an uninhabited valley, settled there, and lived there ever since. Some of the details, such as what happened to the army and why they decided to live there, seem to be purposely left untold. In the village, there is a special occupation called the writer. His only duty is to select new stories from the villagers and write them down in the book, which is the only written document in the village. The book was started by the first writer, one of the 17 founders, as a way to select useful knowledge to be passed on to their descendants. As the story goes, one day, on an unknown day, a black box appeared in the cave where the writer lived. After looking into the box, the writer decided to stop writing the book. Shortly following, people began to line up in the cave to look into the box. Everyone had a different story of what they saw inside, but one element remained constant. The accounts always began with a space without an end, with bookshelves on the sides filled with books, each looking identical to the book in the village. As one continued to survey the space inside the box, after a while, one of the books unexpectedly flew out the shelf towards the observer and opened itself, revealing a story. By time, the villagers realized that the stories from the books were always different, and that one would never be able to read the same page twice. But being gifted with perfect memory, they would not bother at all. In fact, the stories were so vivid that the boundary between reading and reality became blurred. The stories of the villagers' experiences gradually became entangled with the stories from the books inside the box. Looking at the fragment number Paleo 3814, the earliest copy of Great Town Record, I recall the story of the village of Hanu. Fleeting thoughts crossed my mind. Is it possible that the writer did not stop? Is it possible that the fragments of the manuscripts in Cave 17 were all from the same book? Is it possible that we are all in the story?
My project begins with a personal experience. The first time I consciously perceived a gap in my life, a 17-minute period of time lost in nowhere. One sits within the other. That's